Our top story this morning. Top officials from the world's two largest democracies held ministerial-level talks in Washington after their leaders from India and the United States discussed their differences over the Ukraine war. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, Indian External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar and Indian Defense Minister Rajnath Singh met at the State Department for 2+2 format talks, and the talks were held amid a raging war in Eastern Europe. Biden has been pressuring world leaders to take a hard line against Moscow. The United States is seeking more help from India in condemning and applying economic pressure on Russia for invading Ukraine. But India has tried to balance its ties with Russia and the West. Unlike other members of the Quad countries, the United States, Japan and Australia, it has not imposed sanctions on Russia. India's import of Russian oil remained the point of contention between New Delhi and Washington. Even though India receives little of its oil from Russia, it recently stepped up purchases as the democracies are trying to isolate Putin. India has bought at least 13 million barrels of Russian crude oil since the invasion in late February, compared with some 16 million barrels for the whole of last year. During a joint press conference with Indian counterpart S. Jaishankar, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said that democracies should stand together to face Russian President Vladimir Putin. Blinken also said that Washington is asking allies not to increase Russian oil purchases, but India's Jaishankar resisted against concerns on India's energy purchases from Russia. The Indian Foreign Minister said that the focus should be on Europe and not India when it comes to energy imports from Russia. Now, Jaishankar claimed that Europe buys more energy from Russia than India does.
When it comes to oil purchases, sanctions, etc., I just note that there are carve-outs for energy purchases. Of course, we're encouraging countries not to purchase additional energy supplies from Russia. Every country is differently situated, has different needs, requirements, but we're looking to allies and partners not to increase their purchases of Russian energy.
If you are looking at energy purchases from Russia, I would suggest that your attention should be focused on Europe, which probably we do buy some energy which is necessary for our energy security. But I suspect, looking at the figures, probably our total purchases for the month would be less than what Europe does in an afternoon.
Notably, ahead of the talks, White House reportedly stated that New Delhi's energy imports from Moscow do not violate United States sanctions. White House had also added that the United States would be happy to help in diversifying India's energy imports. Apart from Ukraine, bolstering security and democracy in Asia-Pacific region were also part of the dialogue between the Indian Foreign and Defense Minister and their U.S. counterparts. Indian and U.S. officials discussed ways to ensure a free, open and inclusive Indo-Pacific. India is seen as a critical counterweight to growing Chinese power in the region. At the ministerial meeting, U.S. Secretary of Defense said that defense cooperation was important to keep China on track. He also added that as Beijing is constructing dual-use infrastructure along India's border, United States will continue to stand alongside while India defends its sovereign interests. And our correspondent Susan Tehrani is now joining us live from New York. Susan, thank you for joining us. The leaders from the United States and India discussed their respective positions in the war in Ukraine. What can you tell us about the discussions between the two sides?
Right, a noteworthy meeting indeed, and it was very important for the U.S. side to really hammer in and bring home the message that it was a frank and candid conversation between the world's largest and oldest democracies. Joe Biden noted that he was looking forward to not only this conversation prior to the conversation with Prime Minister Modi, but also looking forward to a May 24 meeting of Quad member states to discuss further issues of mutual interest, not only between India and the United States, but also other members of the Quad, which include issues regarding the Indo-Pacific region. You know, while it's very important to talk about the war in Ukraine, America's larger strategic challenge is really China, and
right.
The Biden administration made very clear that it wants its foreign policy issue to be focused on the Indo-Pacific region in Asia, and that's why that it wanted to really hold this meeting with
right.
Prime Minister Modi to once again bring that into the forefront. COVID
right.
was discussed, the Indo-Pacific region security was discussed. Remember, this meeting also comes at a time when we're hearing reports that China just tested another nuclear arsenal. It also comes at a time when the world, not only the United States, India, but also the international community is facing a food crisis, a possible fertilizer crisis for a lot of farmers around the world, here in the United States and again in India. So the supply chain issue, the food crisis was also discussed, and also the economic framework and infrastructure, the Indo-Pacific economic framework and infrastructure, which is very important, again, for, between the two sides, were also discussed.
Right.
And I think it's very important to note that while we did hear that from Anthony Blinken on the one hand, other administration officials, whatever happened between closed doors, between the leaders, and also in the framework of 2+2, it was very that we did hear from officials after the meeting that they were very convinced from the line that India was taking, and they said that it's understandable that not all countries can take the position
right.
that the United States is taking.
Right.
And they also mentioned that India is not a major consumer of Russian oil. Quote, it current imports about 1 to 2% of its total energy imports. So, you know, that's something that the U.S. administration acknowledged, not only at the White House press podium by Jen Psaki, but other administration officials who spoke on background or after that meeting as well.
Right, absolutely. Now, also talking about bolstering security in Asia Pacific, that was also part of the dialogue. What sort of cooperation can we see on that front between the two sides?
So in the framework of 2+2, which was the meeting between Lloyd Austin, America's Defense Secretary, and Anthony Blinken, America's Secretary of State, along with their counterparts from India, we heard Lloyd Austin say that this is a very consequential partnership. That was very important on their part. And they also mentioned that they want to further this defense partnership. And that's why it was very important for India's defense minister to visit the United States in person. We know that he is going to visit an important command center in Hawaii, which is the oldest and largest Indo-Pacific command center in the United States that's dedicated again to the Indo-Pacific region. That cooperation is expected to expand. There were some questions from media outlets on how the United States plans on perhaps acknowledging the fact that India is purchasing parts and also defense equipment from Russia, considering the fact that there is that kind of CATS sanction waiver that the United States has and is able to waive. And the Biden administration said that that was not on the table, it was not discussed, and it did not provide any answers regarding that. So I think they wanted to keep the conversation on mutual grounds, on cooperation, and on issues that are beneficial for the two sides at this point, and focus on things that are more common than different.
All right, Susan, thank you so much for your inputs on this. Now, we're also being joined for more insight by Jason Beardsley, national security expert from Arlington. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, a major bone of contention between the two sides was India stepping up its oil purchase from Moscow. What can you tell us about the impact of this and the difference in their stance on the relations between India and the United States?
Well, I think you heard a great report there from the field that suggests the United States knows that India, Prime Minister Modi, have to look out for their own concerns. This is no secret. It was always going to be a little bit tricky to get countries that are buying oil from Russia to join in on the sanctions. And India, frankly, is one of the most important allies to the United States on the Indo-Pacific front. So we don't have a lot of wiggle room there. And then you add to that the kind of discussion, diplomacy, and talking that Antony Blinken really characterizes for this administration. It's really just a lot of talk. It's great to see the allies get together. But here's the real lesson. What we saw in Ukraine was by the time the Russians rolled in, it's too late. Supplying the Ukrainians behind after that invasion is the worst way to have gone. I think this is a real point in time for the United States to step up with allies like Japan, Australia, and India and fortify that quadrilateral defense agreement. Let's not worry about the oil.
Right.
That's talk that's too late.
Right, absolutely. Now, also another point here. That being said, India has maintained that dialogue is the only way forward and has tried to balance ties with Moscow and the United States. And at a time when major European nations are heavily reliant on Russia for gas and energy, how do you assess India's role in this conflict?
In this conflict, India has got to be a bystander. They're doing what's right for the Indian people. And frankly, I think that's probably the right approach. And I think our State Department and Department of Defense acknowledged that during those talks. So we ourselves, the United States, are purchasing oil from Russia. Also, in the same breath, we rely on Russia to deal with the Iranian JCPOA agreement, which is like talking out of both sides of our mouth. So frankly, it's a little bit of diplomacy, a lot of theatrics. From our optic, the administration here does a lot of talking, but what we're more interested in are the actions that come behind that. So again, with India in mind in particular, that looks like a lot of defense, trade and cooperation agreements in the next year. Let's ramp those up because, frankly, we have not had a cogent response against China so far.
Right.
And if we wanted to impress China, now's a good time to do it. So I think we let the Russia piece go a little bit and focus on Indo-Pacific when it comes to India.
Right, absolutely. Like you mentioned, that India and the United States should now focus on areas of mutual interest. Now, talking about the Indo-Pacific, what sort of progress are you expecting on that front?
Unfortunately, I've watched the administration now for about the last year plus, and we do see that they're much more observational. They like to report the news, but they're not really leading in any direction. So when it came to Afghanistan, you saw the White House come out and say, we're probably going to lose Afghanistan. And then when we did, there was very little reaction. In fact, one could say that we had a disastrous withdrawal there. Then when it came to Ukraine, you heard the White House for about 6 months say Ukraine is probably going to invade, or Russia is, and we didn't do anything about it at the time. So we found ourselves, after the invasion, supplying weapons to Ukraine. Even that is tenuous and limited. So when you ask about what kind of changes we can see in India, I got to tell you, it doesn't look good because this State Department, this Department of Defense have not been bold in leading forward in places that would put China and Russia on their back heels. And I think you know that better than anyone.
All right. Thank you so much for your insights on this, Mr. Jason Beardsley. Thank you for your time. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.